Transmigrated as a disabled protagonist, how should I continue the script? By Yu Wei. Summary. After graduating from university, he joined the renowned Transmigration organization. Due to the requirements of his internship task, he had to reincarnate into a storyline world, transmigrating as a tragically beautiful and strong male protagonist, playing the role of the protagonist as he battled monsters to level up and reclaim the protagonist's body parts. The male protagonist is physically disabled, blind and deaf. What should he do? No problem, the intern comes with external support. He believed that, with his top rank as an intern, he wouldn't be defeated by this challenge, and he even deliberately chose the hardest character. But what's this? During the supervisor's inspection, the Transmigration organization suddenly cancelled the new recruit's external support. In an instant, the nightmare began. How is he supposed to, having lost 12 important body parts right after birth, and without sight, hearing, smell, or touch, find the heroine who will accompany him for life and make it through this frustrating script? Question. How to play this heavily disabled character? After transmigration, I accidentally mistook the black mud as the heroine. Is there still hope for me? CP. Does I. Mutual character development. The protagonist is blind but clear-hearted, incredibly good-looking, and can see the colors of soul's flames. Transmigrating into the male protagonist missing 12 vital body parts, he received the wrong script, recognized the wrong heroine, but ended up living a truly happy life. A mutual salvation and growth story, he and his CP are like two incomplete halves, one physically broken but mentally strong, the other mentally broken but physically strong, meeting each other at the prime of their youth. The story's main plot revolves around seeking out and defeating the demon gods to recover the lost body parts. The protagonist, like a wandering soul, heads towards this goal without awareness, receiving help from various people along the way. The day he finally becomes whole again will mark the most brilliant new beginning of his life. The protagonist's greatest advantage isn't strength or beauty, but the superhuman will to survive that surpasses human limits after transmigration, which moves both bosses and bystanders alike. From existing to wanting to live better, this is a quest that lies deep within everyone's heart. He acts like a mirror, reflecting both the good and evil of humanity, making it hard for anyone to dislike him. The entire story is set to the unyielding spirit of a shonen manga soundtrack, portraying a love that remains steadfast and unchanging. Transmigrated as a disabled protagonist, how should I continue the script? Chapter 1, Transmigrated to Yokohama. To the kind-hearted person who received this. This is a letter from a trainee under the Transmigration department seeking assistance. After graduating from university, on XX year XX month XX day, I joined the Parallel World Management Bureau's Transmigration department. After undergoing a period of training, I am honored to have become a trainee there. My temporarily designated codename is XXX, with a security clearance level of D. At first glance, it doesn't seem promising, but our teacher said not worry like the SCP Foundation next door. Here, D-level security staff at the Transmigration department are not cannon fodder, but official contract signing trainees. I firmly support the senior staff at the Transmigration department. How could the renowned Transmigration department deceive us? I heard that the compensation for breaking the contract is equivalent to a courtyard house in Beijing's second ring. Let's leave that topic aside. In theory, there are tens of thousands of trainees like me, but only 1% are eligible for a permanent positions. In other words, out of 100 people, only one might qualify. I am full of confidence in my own eligibility because I was the top of my class in a group of 1,000 trainees, and I was even personally selected by my superiors. If I can't transition to a permanent position, it would be even harder for others. Besides, the Transmigration department offers great benefits to new recruits, allowing the use of external accessories to assist during missions. The external auxiliary system is indeed very convenient. I used it during my training and, combined with my own foundational abilities, successfully achieved 10 times higher scores. The external auxiliary system is implanted in the consciousness of trainees, providing a full-range map, scenario downloads, automatic line prompts, surveillance, and real-time reporting features. Most of the transmigration department's services are aimed at transmigrators. Where there are transmigrators, there will inevitably be disruptions in the world. The typical task for trainees is to stabilize the plot worlds under the jurisdiction of the transmigration department. Speaking of this, I believe you can now understand, I am about to participate in my first trainee mission, which is also a crucial task that will determine where I am assigned in the future. My first mission is to enter the Dororo manga anime subworld and take on the role of the male protagonist, Yakimaru. In fact, I have heard of this world before. While studying in the main world, I had already heard about this rather tragic manga, which was later rumored to have been adapted into an anime. However, I've always kept my distance from this type of story, so my understanding only goes as far as looking up on Baidu who Dororo is and who the main character is. But it doesn't matter. I've already downloaded the Dororo script, and the transmigration method is the most reliable childhood transmigration. What a trainee needs to do is take things step by step, it can't be rushed. During my childhood phase, I'll have plenty of time to study the script and make use of my essay writing skills to come up with 100 different acting methods. Just when I and the other trainees had everything prepared, something unexpected happened. The higher-ups of the Transmigration Department, the legendary Parallel World Management Bureau, sent staff down for an inspection. Perhaps it was to showcase the excellence of the trainees, or maybe they were filled with confidence in us. The leader of the Transmigration Department decided to disable the external auxiliary system for trainees and have us directly enter the plot worlds. The task of maintaining the plot remains unchanged, and the roles we play remain the same. The only difference is that we've lost our external accessories. As you can see, my external auxiliary system as a trainee was revoked, and I didn't finish reading the script in time. I admit this is a significant mistake on my part. I shouldn't have made such a low-level error. Fortunately, I did skim through it. Yakimaru's main plot revolves around defeating monsters to level up, traveling with the female protagonist Dororo. As long as the main storyline of defeating the demons doesn't go off track, the will of the world will naturally push me towards encountering key characters. Deviating from a few side plots shouldn't be an issue. Roughly speaking, maybe there won't be any problems. The freedom to improvise has increased, but the issue lies with the character Yakimaru. That's right, I drew the short straw for this mission. Originally, I planned to perform well, but who could have predicted that this character would instantly turn into the most terrifying task of this round? The premise of Yakimaru's story is that he was sacrificed to demons by his own father at birth. The demons granted Daigo Kagemitsu's wish, bringing prosperity to the country, and the price was taking away Yakimaru's body. That's right, you read that correctly. After I was born, I lost 12 body parts. My eyes were blind, my ears were deaf, my face was disfigured, my spine was gone, my limbs were gone. All that remained was a bare head and torso, along with one part that proved I was still male, so I wasn't completely changed. Thankfully, the demons didn't take my male organ, and I'm also lucky that I'm in the anime version and not the manga version. I heard that in the manga, Yakimaru lost 48 body parts. I wonder if something like that could still even be considered human. Perhaps even an ancient god wouldn't be much more than that, a form that surpasses the human limit in terms of appearance. So, I ask, after being abandoned by my parents and barely surviving, how am I supposed to complete the storyline? How am I supposed to find the female protagonist, Dororo? How can I even tell who is who? Let me be frank, I don't mean to disrespect the Western pantheon, but this isn't just a nightmare beginning. It's as if they're throwing me into hell and still expecting me to crawl my way back up to heaven. After I succeeded in transmigrating, I sent countless letters, but I received no response. I don't know which gentleman, lady, or unknown existence this letter will end up in the hands of. However, I ask that you, considering my rich experiences, after you finish your meal and rest, please forward this letter to the Transmigration Department. Endless gratitude. A certain intern whose real name is protected by a confidentiality contract, Yakimaru left this message. Somewhere in the void, it seemed that a mysterious existence finished reading and then burst out laughing. With a flick of the hand, the letter was forwarded back to the return service. The transmigration department, this kind of trash department, and people still believe in it? How foolish. 14 years later. By the riverbank, a teenager with a high ponytail plunged into the water to catch fish, his sword and blades stabbing into the swimming fish. He then reached out and caught a crab crawling on the sand. There was no expression on his face, refined and beautiful, his entire being seemed like a lifeless puppet. The next moment, the crab, in its desperate struggle, clamped onto his nose with its pincers, refusing to let go no matter how much he shook it. His gaze slowly shifted toward the crab, indifferent, neither feeling pain nor give any unnecessary emotion. Because this face was merely a mask shaped by someone. Then, the boy cleanly and swiftly crushed the pincers, carrying his meal for the day as he walked back to the shore. Living together with him, Jukai had just finished his crafting work, a weary smile on his face. He held two prosthetic legs resembling human limbs and walked over. Yakimaru, try out these new legs. Last time, when you were chasing that fast-moving animal, your movements were a bit inconvenient. I've crafted a new pair of legs for you, so you won't have to worry about getting them soaked and needing to dry them anymore. The boy named Yakimaru did not react. His gray-brown pupils were void, unable to reflect any light from the outside world. He couldn't see, couldn't hear, and lacked the human sensation of pain. It was only after Jukai took the food from his hands that he slowly began to understand the other's intentions. Expressionless, he walked toward the room. He sat on the mat, his face youthful. Before long, the prosthetic legs attached to his stumps had been removed. After they were discarded, all that remained of him was his upper half, including his waist, with no skin on his body. His exposed form was tightly wrapped in layers of white cloth, and his dull clothing clung to his frail body. Jukai had long become accustomed to such cruel scenes, yet he still sighed inwardly. Yakimaru. He had raised his adopted son to live in a form different from that of a human. In this era of war and disasters, there were many pitiable people, but none could compare to what Yakimaru had gone through. The day he found Yakimaru was the darkest moment of his life, a time when he was at his most desperate, intent on ending it all. It was then that he saw a wooden tub floating on the river and witnessed an abandoned infant wrapped in swaddling cloth. He was moved by the softest part of his heart and couldn't help but want to cry out loud. An adult with hands and feet longed for death, while a newborn, empty-handed, longed for survival. He could no longer easily abandon life. At the very least, before raising Yakimaru to adulthood, he couldn't allow himself to die. He wanted to teach this child how to survive, to accomplish miracles unimaginable to others. He believed that this resilient and intelligent child could do it. Noticing the small pinch mark on Yakimaru's nose, Jukai smiled. Got pinched by a crab again, huh? He returned holding a carefully prepared new mask, placed inside an immaculate box. Each mask was meticulously designed based on Yakimaru's disfigured features, carefully drawn and crafted to fit the face he had lost. This one was a truly beautiful face, with long eyebrows, thick eyelashes, a high-bridged nose, and lips that were neither too thin nor too thick, giving a sense of quiet comfort with its well-proportioned features. I'll put it on for you. This is your face at 14. Jukai removed Yakimaru's original mask, calmly looking at the terrifying face beneath it. For someone of his age, beauty or ugliness wasn't very important. Who would despise the appearance of their own child? Besides, Yakimaru wasn't really ugly. After putting on the new mask, he looked at Yakimaru with satisfaction, as if seeing a child who had grown a year older. Yakimaru, this is your face at 14. He took the boy's right prosthetic hand and helped him move across the ground, teaching him how to write 14. Every year, at this exact moment, he would teach him how to write his age, fearing that Yakimaru might not develop a proper sense of years. Yakimaru expressionlessly allowed Jukai to guide his hand to write characters. After writing 3 times, the boy withdrew his fingers. This indicated that he had learned it. Jukai praised him. Yakimaru, you have a very high talent for learning. Yakimaru remained silent as usual. Jukai didn't mind, or rather, this was the normal situation. He took Yakimaru outside, using fire to grill raw food, teaching the boy, who preferred eating fish and crabs directly, how to master the techniques of eating properly. In reality, Yakimaru already knew all of this. He just found that starting a fire is too troublesome. This body is extremely strong, having been influenced by the power of the demon gods. Not only is his physical constitution superior to that of humans, but common poisons have no effect on him. However, the gratitude he feels toward his foster father cannot be explained in just a few words. When his foster father isn't paying attention, he will secretly eat raw food, but when in front of him, he obediently eats cooked food. Taste is a wonderful thing, but unfortunately, he doesn't have a tongue. Yakimaru and Jukai sat in front of the campfire. Compared to usual outdoor cooking, they had mats to sit on. After the fish was grilled, Jukai handed Yakimaru the fish on the skewer. Yakimaru shifted his mask slightly and began eating. He couldn't eat with the mask on. Jukai sat across from him, staring at the mask with a hint of frustration. I can't find the right materials. If I could make the mouth move, maybe you wouldn't have to take off your mask. These words were meaningless to Yakimaru, who couldn't hear any sound. What he saw through the mask was a mass of white flames. That was Jukai's life flame. Behind the mask, unknown to Jukai, Yakimaru's soul also gained a sense of security. If there was anyone in the world Yakimaru could trust, it would undoubtedly be Jukai, the one who raised him. As for this unreliable mission, assigned by superiors who only care about flattering those above and setting traps for workers, Yakimaru could no longer place any trust in the transmigration department. He understood the intern policy: death meant real death. Given how easy it was to recruit, the transmigration department wouldn't waste any extra effort on just one intern. After losing the external auxiliary system, his situation was no different from that of the original character. The only possible advantage was having knowledge from a previous life. Knowing how to write in Japanese. Thinking about it this way, transmigrators aren't so unfortunate after all. Yakimaru swallowed the fish in his mouth, feeling as though he were chewing wax, while imagining that he's eating the transmigration department. After finishing the meal, he focused on digestion, his sightless eyes wandering. In his vision, he could see many forms of life flames, plants, animals. As for humans, only Jukai existed. Through the original work's Baidu encyclopedia, he learned that a white life flame represents a kind-hearted person, while red represents evil entities. A life flame with a bit of red glow represents someone who has killed or had contact with evil beings. This knowledge helped him reduce a lot of potential harm in the earlier stages, as he wasn't indifferent to encountering evil entities. Yakimaru's natural aura attracted such beings, and from childhood to now, running into them was a common occurrence. What they called evil beings, from the perspective of someone like him who transmigrated, were no different from Japanese yokai, and they were even easier to kill than yokai. The key was, if he had transmigrated into a character from Onmyoji. Yakimaru quietly reminisced about the time during training when he played as an Onmyoji character. With a flick of the folding fan, the Hyaki would appear, and the kind of evil entities that fed on humans were as easy to deal with as the ones from Kimetsu no Yaiba next door. Unfortunately, Dororo was set in a fictional Sengoku period of Japan, where there were no real Onmyoji, only people with special abilities who killed evil entities within their means to protect themselves, except when they had no money. Wait, were those memories real? Or had he just conjured them up in a void after transmigrating? Why hadn't he met a single person from the transmigration department in the past 14 years? No. Was he really a transmigrator? Or could it be that an evil entity created an illusion, distorting his memories? Under the forced calm of someone severely disabled, Yakimaru had been closed off for 14 years, occasionally letting his mind wander, creating internal monologues to enrich his transmigrator spirit a bit. He couldn't clearly discern the reason that kept him going. Was it salaries? The identity of an official worker? Modern life? Or perhaps, just the innate human desire for survival? It was probably the latter. Humans exist to pursue a better life. He didn't want to die like this. Even if it was just a faint glimmer of hope, he still wanted to succeed in his role, complete the mission, and eventually be retrieved by the transmigration department. All he hoped for was to receive a satisfactory evaluation. Whether or not he became a permanent employee afterward didn't matter. It truly didn't matter, not after living such a life. Yakimaru slightly lifted his face, gazing at a bird flying across the sky. Its small, weak life flame flew far away, not knowing when it might be killed, yet it seemed more free than humans. What color was the sky? It seemed to be blue, a blue he was on the verge of forgetting. His eyes couldn't perceive many colors: darkness, white light, and the red glow of evil. Only a few lifeless objects displayed green, such as the samurai sword his foster father had equipped him with. Evil entities that sought to devour him every year emitted red, triggering his conditioned reflex to draw his sword. Yakimaru's thoughts drifted in an unknown direction until the white life flame of a human approached him. Along with the hand that reached out, the flame gently touched his head. He made his response. Even when life is filled with despair, never let go of the hope to get through each day. As an evil entity seized the moment when the two were resting to launch a sneak attack, Yakimaru swiftly detached his arm. His right forearm separated, revealing a sharp sword embedded at the elbow. He didn't retreat but instead advanced, swinging the sword and slaughtering the creature. The evil entity's shrill cries reached Jukai's ears, piercing and sharp, like nails scraping against stone. A large amount of thin blood splattered onto both of them. Jukai, long accustomed to this, wiped the blood stains from Yakimaru's face and said, "You've become stronger." As Yakimaru grew older, more and more evil entities were drawn to him. At the same time, Yakimaru's ability to slay these creatures grew stronger. Jukai, who once protected Yakimaru, was gradually becoming a burden to him. Yakimaru couldn't guess what was going on in Jukai's mind. He clearly remembered that, according to the original story, he was meant to act independently around the age of 16, which would lead him to meet the female protagonist, Dororo. Until then, he hadn't considered that Jukai might leave him, nor had he planned to wander the world just yet. He was preparing to become a sword god on the secluding mountain. Like, maxing out his combat level right in the beginner's village? Not a bad goal. Yakimaru worked hard toward this direction, reflecting on his predecessors, the one who lost the senses of pain, taste, smell, and emotions, becoming an infinitely wise strategist, the one who had all memories and emotions stripped away, but still held on to hope, reaching the highest levels of education, the one frozen in ice, unable to move, yet for decades persisted with the thought of ascending in the cultivation world. Being disabled doesn't limit someone. Some are crippled, while others become legends. Jukai, watching Yakimaru head out once more to hunt evil creatures for practice, fell into deep thought, a slight frown crossing his face. It seems I'll need to prepare more weapons for Yakimaru. He felt a bit lighter in his heart. With such formidable strength, Yakimaru could defend himself regardless of whether Jukai was there or not. Neither the evil entities nor the demon gods could easily harm him, and those malicious humans wouldn't be able to approach someone like Yakimaru, who could distinguish between good and evil. Jukai returned to the room, picked up an old book that had been left untouched for a long time, and felt a wave of frustration. Why doesn't Yakimaru want to learn sign language? Because that's how the character was designed in the manga. According to the animated version's design, the cold and distant Yakimaru had lost communication abilities for many years. He couldn't learn as a child, and by the time he could, the only person he could communicate with was Jukai. If he didn't learn, he wouldn't have to speak his lines. But what if he learned and then couldn't deliver his lines properly? Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong-willed protagonist with a damaged body. Let him be a strong Every day, he cursed the entire transmigration department, cursing them to encounter the hounds of Tindalos when they transmigrated. It seemed the curse had somehow hit the wrong target. After some time, while hunting evil creatures, Yakimaru came across a new life flame on the road. That soul could only be described as a vibrant, multicolored white. Here it comes again. A vibrant, multicolored white. It had been a long time since Yakimaru had seen such a vibrant array of colors, and he was momentarily stunned, unable to distinguish between good and evil. Hesitating, he forgot to reject the person approaching, feeling a strange sense of daze as his hand was taken by the other. The transmigrating woman excitedly grabbed Yakimaru's hand, not caring whether it was real or a prosthetic. She focused on her own words. Yakimaru, I'll take you to other worlds and help you heal your body that's been corroded by the power of the demon gods. And then, Yakimaru's figure appeared in another world, Japan's Yokohama. His mind was clouded, completely unaware of where he was or what major event had just happened. By his feet lay the transmigrating woman, her face completely distorted by the hounds of Tindalos. He reached out to touch her, only to find that her soul had turned into scattered points of light. Transmigrators typically have insurance. If they die, they can return, and the transmigration department will pay the corresponding price. May your soul bear no resentment. Yakimaru knelt halfway down, softly saying the words in his heart. No matter what, this was someone who died for him, whether male or female, their soul must have been kind-hearted. After the tragic event unfolded, the boy, who had grown accustomed to killing and death, stood up. His long black hair, tied with a hairband, swayed slightly in the sea breeze of this new world. Immediately after, his heart and mind were struck with great shock. So many human souls. Normally, a village would only have a little over 100 people, but within the range he saw, there were no less than 1,000 people. Did I enter an ancient city? Yakimaru fell into a deeper state of confusion, his thoughts stuck within the limits of the Dororo world. He hesitated. Was the story supposed to start now, without him knowing? Was the world's consciousness actively pushing him toward the plot? In that case, should he start looking for Dororo? Or should he start searching for the demon gods? Kill the demon gods. Once he killed all the demon gods, he could regain his missing body parts and find who is the female protagonist. As an outstanding trainee from the training program, the transmigration department's intern with the highest chance of becoming a permanent employee, Yakimaru carefully considered his options before stepping forward into the unknown with firm belief that he must grit his teeth and see the script through to the end. The direction he headed. It was unmistakably Yokohama's Suribachi district, the place where human souls were in the most chaos. Yakimaru spotted a soul different from that of a human, with a core engulfed in a deep red and black life flame. Strangely, surrounding this typical, chaotic and evil, life flame was a layer of soft, light pink flame. It's actually shifting colors. He didn't stop his combat actions. Upon seeing the target, he grabbed the sword at his waist and began to fight. Fortunately, his foster father had made sure he brought a sword with him when he went out this time. In the Suribachi district, Sheep King Nakahara Chuya, dressed as usual in a hoodie with his hair hidden under the hood, walked through the chaotic alleyway, low-key yet standing out. Suddenly provoked by an outsider, who even swung a sword aiming straight for his head, Nakahara Chuya's face turned purple with anger. He shattered the opponent's sword with his ability, but the opponent dodged his kick, leaping 10 meters away. You little brat, why did you suddenly attack me? If it weren't for the fact that the other seemed relatively young, Nakahara Chuya would have struck with more ruthlessness. The boy across from him, dressed in ragged, patched-up clothes, kept his head down, his bangs covering half of his eyes. He threw off his prosthetic hands, revealing a portion of a sword, causing Nakahara Chuya to look at him in surprise. Yakimaru's face, like the mask he wore, showed no trace of emotion, as if he were saying, "Fight." In Yakimaru's time, battling evil entities required full effort. Fighting demon gods meant fighting to the death. His life bloomed for the purpose of eradicating demon gods. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2, First Encounter with Dazai. But just after leaving the village, Yakimaru ran into a tough opponent. He didn't feel pain, but with his heightened senses, he detected the false sensation of cutting from his sword. Immediately after, a heavy force beyond his limit bore down on him. He could only avoid the attack and use deflection techniques to prevent injury. At the same time, he noticed that the life flame in front of him moved at an incredible speed. The red glow around the flame was burning fiercely, enveloping the surroundings and, for the first time, overshadowing the other colors. It was a kind of deep red, yet pure power. Not good, this demonic power was beyond his expectations. It would be safer to retreat and come back later. In midair, Yakimaru twisted, retrieving his arm and reattaching it to its original position. With a burst of immense strength, after failing several attacks in a row, he began to retreat, no longer intending to engage in a prolonged fight with his opponent. Nakahara Chuya, furious and in pursuit, shouted, "Do you think you can escape?" He transformed into a red glow, rapidly speeding after him. Although the way his opponent concealed weapons shocked the young boy, the Sheep King had to protect his comrades and couldn't allow a hostile youth to easily escape from his sight. This chase lasted through half of Suribachi. Yakimaru, unfamiliar with the streets, adapted quickly to the complex environment. Turning left and right, and relying on his finely honed sixth sense, within less than half an hour, he managed to shake off the color-shifting demon god, disappearing into the chaotic alleyways. A few minutes later, Nakahara Chuya arrived at this place, looking furious as he grabbed a nearby passerby and demanded, "Where did that little brat go?" I don't know. It looked like he crawled out through that hole in the wall. Take me there." Following the person, Nakahara Chuya was left exasperated as he looked at the size of the hole in the wall. He measured himself against it, realizing that unless he broke down the wall, there was no way he'd fit through. This was the problem with Suribachi Street. Its buildings were constructed in a chaotic, disorderly fashion, making it too easy for someone to escape. Wait, how did that kid, who was taller than him, manage to crawl through? Nakahara Chuya was confused for a second. The answer was, Yakimaru's limbs were detachable and replaceable. As long as his head could get through, the rest of his body didn't matter. Leaving the central area of Suribachi Street, Yakimaru's clothes were once again covered in dirt, making him indistinguishable from the residents of Suribachi. This place was originally a slum in Yokohama, established in the post-war period of Japan, occupying a massive crater of destruction, and had become the least desirable place for Yokohama's citizens to enter. He lifted his arm and patted the dust off his hair, thinking to himself, an unsuccessful start. He had lost the warrior sword Jukai had given him and nearly damaged his prosthetic limbs. It became clear that the power of the demon gods was on a completely different level from the usual evil entities. He had underestimated their strength. Thinking about how there were 12 such demon gods, Yakimaru couldn't help but feel a sense of heaviness. The mission was serious, not something to be taken lightly. The black-haired boy, under the indifferent stares of those around him, stares that could hardly be called friendly, gazed blankly at his surroundings. His lifeless eyes found a direction, and he started climbing the steps, intent on finding the next evil entity that would be easier to deal with. After searching for a whole day, it seemed as though the evil entities had temporarily hidden themselves, as Yakimaru couldn't find a single one. Having lost his sense of direction back home, he wandered around the outskirts of Suribachi, avoiding humans. He resorted to living as if he were out in the wild, continuing his search for fish in the river. A calico cat, which had followed him without him noticing, sat behind Yakimaru, its round eyes fixed on him. Yakimaru used his sword arm to spear a fish, then took a sip of the murky river water, his lower body soaked as he climbed onto the shore. For once, he reacted slightly to something nearby, gazing toward the calico cat sitting on the trash can lid. The cat meowed at him, seemingly attracted by the fresh fish. After 3 seconds, Yakimaru, seeing no issue, shifted his gaze away. Although that small, white life flame resembled that of a human, humans weren't typically that short, unless it was a child. But a child couldn't have followed him this whole time, so it must be the pure soul of a small animal. Rabbits or things like that? Those animals were too much trouble to eat, you had to remove the fur and bones. In the end, eating fish was still more convenient. Yakimaru sat far from the water, not bothering to light a fire. He pushed his mask up to the side and simply swallowed the fish whole, thus, his meal was finished. The calico cat suddenly widened its eyes, its fur standing on end, as if it had been startled. Seeing that Yakimaru had no reaction, the calico cat gradually relaxed its tense body, its whiskers twitching. Its bright, alert eyes narrowed into vertical slits in the night. It jumped down from the trash can that no one wanted to approach, trotted a bit, and quickly caught up to Yakimaru, walking alongside him like a small tail following his shadow. Yakimaru searched for a place to spend the night. His need for sleep was minimal, any place that could block the wind and rain would do. It was a dreamless night. The black-haired boy squatted down, burying his face in his knees to sleep. His dull, gray clothing made even pickpockets take a wide detour. Even Yokohama's street urchins rarely wore such a patchwork of fabric scraps held together by a single rope. Although the cloth covered most of his body, it made him appear extremely destitute and hopeless. After all, this was someone who couldn't even afford bandages, using white fabric to wrap his ankles and wrists. In the early morning, the calico cat, having found a more comfortable spot nearby, woke up, stretching its body. The cracking sounds of its bones echoed, making the cat's face show an expression somewhere between discomfort and relaxation. The cat moved gracefully and silently in front of the black-haired boy, its noiseless steps waking Yakimaru. Yakimaru looked at it. Then, he remained in his position, leaning on his knees, his eyes unfocused, simply staring at the calico cat. The cat had initially been prepared to dodge, not wanting to be petted, but seeing that he wasn't moving at all, it became bolder. It cautiously reached out with its white paw and touched Yakimaru's leg. Yakimaru didn't react. The cat then tried again, this time tapping Yakimaru's arm. Yakimaru grabbed its paw and gently let it go, disliking his weapons being touched on by a small animal. The calico cat retracted its paw, reflexively licking the fur on the back of it as if in thought. It paced back and forth in front of Yakimaru, its long tail swaying in soft curves, tempting someone to pet it. However, Yakimaru couldn't see exactly what it was doing, only sensing the small life flame swaying in front of him, confused. What a beautiful flame! Yakimaru had rarely seen such a small, yet so pure, flame. It was, in fact, purer than many of the human souls in this wretched time, and it carried no malicious intent. He felt a quiet satisfaction seeing this beautiful and harmless life force appear before him and, as usual, silently observed it. Keep surviving. Don't let this world destroy you. I will surely slay the demon gods and restore order to this world. Thinking like this, Yakimaru cast aside his transmigrator mentality, immersing himself fully into his identity in this world. He didn't know that he had crossed through time and space, nor did he realize that right in front of him sat one of the hidden masterminds of the Bungo stray dogs world. Under the appearance of the calico cat, Natsume Soseki felt a bit troubled. What's going on with this child? He often liked to take on the form of a cat, wandering through the streets and alleys of Yokohama. Gathering intelligence was secondary, this allowed him to see the true side of Yokohama. Conveniently, it also helped him understand that one of his disciples had an obsession with cats, and not just any obsession, he couldn't resist giving dried fish to any cat he met, and the poor boy could never seem to give away any of it. This time, as usual, Natsume Soseki wandered through the chaotic streets of Suribachi, intending to observe the ability users who operated outside of government control. Who would have thought that he would witness this black-haired boy fighting the Sheep King alone? Fighting alone was one thing, and considering the Sheep King's relatively good-natured personality, he wouldn't easily kill someone. What Natsume Soseki never expected was that, during the escape, he would have the chance to witness someone who could detach and reattach their limbs. Natsume Soseki deeply felt as though he were watching a horror movie. His old heart couldn't handle this kind of excitement. Before he had even recovered, as he continued to blatantly and boldly watch the boy, he saw something even more startling, a movable face. This boy, is there anything on his body that's actually real? After touching Yakimaru's limbs, Natsume Soseki quickly confirmed that they weren't living flesh and blood, but prosthetics. The boy's arms, legs, and even his face were all meticulously crafted objects. His arm concealed a weapon, and beneath his face mask, there was no skin. He ate without chewing, simply swallowing out of habit. Was this the result of human experimentation? The side effects of some ability? Or perhaps Japan's black market prosthetic technology? Natsume Soseki's imagination was truly vivid, befitting his dual role as an author. After his initial shock passed, he fell silent, now understanding just how difficult it must be for the boy to move so freely. Then, a new question surfaced. He couldn't understand why the boy would provoke the Sheep King. Was someone manipulating him? In the following days, the calico cat would occasionally appear near Yakimaru, but most of the time, it would vanish, not staying with him the entire time or following him closely. Yakimaru felt a subtle sense of regret. Despite having encountered many animals and humans, apart from his foster father, Jukai, there wasn't a second kind-hearted and harmless life flame that would always stay by his side. Unable to find his way home and unable to locate the evil entities he needed to slay, Yakimaru, who avoided the color-shifting demon god, finally understood his own thoughts from the original story. Even if someone can briefly accompany him, they will inevitably leave. The only exception to this was Dororo, who admired Yakimaru. That was the bond set by the script. At first, Yakimaru felt a bit conflicted in his heart. Someone who has never experienced love cannot fully understand it, but the thought of someone following him without regret, even in his current state, was deeply touching, truly someone worthy of admiration in any age. They will appear. One day in the future, the one who will stay by my side, never leaving. The clouds in the sky slowly drifted apart. The black-haired boy, from an era of chaos, wandered through the quiet streets of Yokohama, honing his swordsmanship and physical strength, striving to one day slay the demon gods and reclaim his first body part. In this simple, natural life, Yakimaru continued for a while. The youths of Suribachi Street soon heard that the Sheep King, Nakahara Chuya, was looking for a black-haired boy who frequently appeared around the area. It was said that the two had a grudge, and some claimed to have seen the black-haired boy attack the Sheep King and then successfully escape his pursuit. Back at the base, Nakahara Chuya wore a frustrated expression. Every time he was close to catching the boy, the target somehow managed to escape using unknown methods. Could someone secretly tell him info? Nakahara Chuya didn't suspect anyone around him, but he did feel like someone in Suribachi was enjoying the spectacle. Chuya, I think you're taking this too seriously. If you can't find him, just let it go. Some of his fellow sheep members, who hadn't seen Yakimaru and Nakahara Chuya's confrontation, dismissed Nakahara Chuya's urgency. No, Nakahara Chuya shook his head, I have a feeling he won't pass up the chance to kill me. Another boy, wearing a blue ring on his hand, curiously asked, so, what will you do when you find him? First, I'll give him a good beating. Nakahara Chuya hesitated for a moment, recalling that unusual fighting style. He's very skilled, but I'm not exactly sure why he harbors such hostility toward me. If it's a misunderstanding, I'll try to resolve it. If it's actual enmity, then I'll decide whether to deal with him or not at that point. I can't just let him keep targeting me. He couldn't be called weak, but his not overly aggressive response immediately drew teasing from his companions. As expected, Chuya is just too soft-hearted. If it were up to me, I'd kill him the moment I saw him. That's right, anyone daring to ambush Chuya could harm us in the future too. I support Chuya searching for that guy during the day. Fine. I support it too. Recognizing the potential danger of the enemy made Nakahara Chuya more alert, and the rest of the sheep members quickly adjusted their stance. Even though they were unhappy that Chuya wasn't at the base, which made them feel less secure, the external threat also needed to be dealt with. Nakahara Chuya didn't pay close attention to their conversation, feeling quite frustrated, as he walked to the side and gazed off into the distance. A vague sense of unease stirred in his heart. While the port mafia boss continuously issued orders for killings, a strange voice suddenly appeared. Surely, he wasn't following anyone's orders to eliminate the sheep in Suribachi, right? Besides the mafia, what other organization would be so twisted as to send someone with missing limbs into battle? This thought was enough to spark some well-placed insults, successfully putting a black mark on the reputation of the port mafia. There was no helping it. At this point, secretly cursing the port mafia had become a common attitude. The root cause of Yokohama's chaos was that crazed boss of the port mafia. Ever since his health began to decline, his personality had turned extremely violent. At best, he became suspicious of high-ranking members, fearing they would try to take his power. At worst, he issued kill orders indiscriminately, whether it was the government or civilians. Anyone who crossed him was slaughtered without mercy. During such a time of paranoia, there was almost no young person who wanted to join the port mafia. In Yokohama's center, near the 5 towering buildings of the port mafia, a few playful children were scribbling on a luxury black car with chalk. As soon as an adult passerby noticed, their expression changed, and they shouted at the children, "Stop that! Go home, quickly!" The chalk drawings were soon discovered by the port mafia boss's driver, who panicked. "Boss!" The elderly man, whose health had recently worsened, was being helped by others as he gasped for breath. His rage made the veins in his temples and neck pulse visibly. His wrinkled face showed no hint of kindness, only a coldness that struck fear into those who saw him. "Do you really need to consult me for such a trivial matter?" the elderly man rasped, his voice hoarse and aged. "Kill all of those who damaged the car. Anyone who dares to provoke the port mafia, leave no one alive." The driver, drenched in cold sweat, glanced at the others. They had already received the order and were quickly moving to investigate and track down the culprits. It was over. The driver thought grimly to himself, "Those kids who drew on the car are surely doomed." Yakimaru constantly avoided crowded places, as his very presence seemed to attract evil entities. Walking among people would only lure in more monsters. He sat on what he assumed was a discarded wooden plank, which was actually part of an old seesaw in a secluded children's playground. His indifferent expression and shabby appearance made even the children passing by too afraid to play nearby. Suddenly, he looked up, noticing several life flames dotted with red specks appearing not far away. These were the flames of evil people. Either they had killed someone, or they had been in contact with or influenced by the demon gods. The black-haired boy jumped off the wooden plank, causing the seesaw to swing violently. He began walking toward the direction where the evil people were gathering. Calculating the distance, he focused his senses, observing the faint energies in the dark. Many passers-by were also drawn toward that direction, but after realizing what was happening, they panicked and quickly fled, or pulled out their phones to call for help. The locals who lived in this area knew well enough that the night belonged to the port mafia, and the last thing anyone wanted was to provoke those men in black suits. It's the mafia. Port mafia is invading the residential area. As the cries of frightened residents echoed outside the building, Yakimaru paused below, looking up in slight confusion. A fantasy world indeed, were ancient cities' walls really this tall? How was he supposed to get up there? Yakimaru focused his mind, sharpening his senses. This world was filled with many inanimate objects and microscopic life forms. While they weren't as distinct as plants or animals, if he carefully concentrated, they could assist him in his movements. Doing so, however, was mentally exhausting. Ah, there, an obstacle in green, faintly glowing, an entrance. Yakimaru was about to proceed and find the entrance, but his attention was partly diverted by a life flame that suddenly appeared behind him. It was unlike the many impure flames he had encountered before. This one was a pure, spotless white. In fact, it was even purer than the flames of his foster father, Jukai, or the small animals that often followed him. This was the flame of someone who had never killed, never been tainted by crime, and only a soul that retained such purity could possess this color. Like that of a child. No, the life flame was slightly taller than that of a child. Yakimaru gazed through the complex material world, seeing straight into the essence of souls. This ability, the soul sight, was something he honed after his transmigration and rebirth. In a low magic world, only ancient sages or monks could possess such power. But in the world Dororo, he was the gifted protagonist, destined to slay the demon gods and restore the world, once invaded by these demons, back into human hands. In this moment, a quiet sense of anticipation blossomed in Yakimaru's heart. The person was approaching him. They stopped just outside the safe range, 3 steps away. Unable to hear any sound or clearly see the person, Yakimaru simply focused on determining whether this pure life flame belonged to someone significant to the storyline. In his journey through the world, he had occasionally come across white flames symbolizing purity, but aside from his foster father Jukai, no other pure white flame had ever stayed by his side for long. Yakimaru remained silent for a moment, suppressing his thoughts. He chose, like the puppet he was in the original story, to swiftly move on and focus on his own mission. Unable to find any evil entities, Yakimaru decided to drive away the wrongdoers instead. Who's there? Standing on the edge of danger, the owner of the life flame, who had called out but received no response, felt displeased. His hawk-like eyes briefly glimmered with a sharp light. He watched as the other person, without hesitation, stepped into an area surrounded by the mafia. Is this righteousness? In this city, teetering on the edge of chaos and decay, could an anti-mafia hero really emerge? Initially believing that darkness was more interesting and that light was beyond saving, Dazai Osamu raised his head, listening to the gunshots above. His relatively young face bore a depth of thought and confusion far beyond his years. He couldn't comprehend the other person's actions. The Port Mafia's influence was immense here, and saving those people would be pointless. The convenience store owner hiding below, who also witnessed Yakimaru's bold actions, felt a mix of anger and helplessness. His eyes showed a brief glimmer of hope, quickly followed by worry, while his grandson exclaimed, "That big brother is going to save them." "Don't say anything." The shop owner hurriedly covered his grandson's mouth, not daring to offend the Port Mafia. Dazai Osamu tilted his head, looking at the tear-filled eyes of the child and the weak, sorrowful adult at the convenience store. How pathetic, he thought. They were even more useless than that masked boy. As the sounds of fierce fighting escalated upstairs, Dazai Osamu, mimicking the child, bit his lip and spoke. For the first time, in a soft voice, he curiously repeated the words, "Good luck?" Could light really triumph over darkness? In reality, Yakimaru was a nemesis for ordinary people without special abilities. His heightened sixth sense warned him of danger, allowing him to enter a martial arts state of awareness, as long as he didn't encounter opponents with speed or agility beyond his expectations. In the original story, Yakimaru was weakened at first, not because his combat strength was lacking, but because he struggled to adapt to reabsorbing his body parts, which left him temporarily vulnerable to external influences. At this moment, however, Yakimaru hadn't encountered such issues. At 14, he possessed the instinctive fighting abilities of a wild animal. A bullet that doesn't hit its target is worthless. Yakimaru, unable to even see the bullets or the guns, effortlessly dodged the danger and struck down the mafia members with ease. His true face remained hidden behind the mask of calm indifference, like someone devoid of emotion or compassion. It didn't take long for Yakimaru to knock unconscious everyone who attacked him or attempted to flee. To the parents lying on the ground, shielding their child, the black-haired boy who charged in and fought was incredibly powerful, his movements swift and precise, striking down opponents as if it were a matter of life and death. Without wasting a word after dealing with the mafia members, he simply leaped out of the window, using a vantage point to jump down from the 5th floor with ease. Immediately after, the black-haired boy dashed off in another direction, as fast as lightning, his senses focused on the world around him. Nearby, a similar situation unfolds. Half an hour later, after rescuing 2 families, Yakimaru played the role of an anonymous hero. He didn't ask for a reward, nor did he leave his name before departing. Unlike the simple people of ancient times, he understood the importance of self-reliance. He could resolve the immediate danger, but he couldn't solve others' lifelong troubles. People must strive for themselves. As dusk fell, night once again descended. The port mafia's anger was another matter entirely. Yakimaru walked along the riverbank, his straw sandals squelching in the wet mud. His body remained unharmed, a stark contrast to the struggles he faced when dealing with the demon gods. Dazai Osamu followed closely behind, sharing the intelligence he had gathered. I did some investigating and found that the 2 families you saved had something in common. Their children had, while playing with friends, boldly scribbled graffiti on the private car of the port mafia boss. If you hadn't intervened, they would have met the same fate as that 3rd family, who were all killed. I wonder if you'll regret it, saving nothing but reckless children. Their parents may not always be grateful to you, and they might even let slip your involvement. This could lead the port mafia to believe you're provoking Yokohama's Dragon's Head organization. This means that after today, you'll be on the port mafia's hit list. If you don't want to be hunted like a dog by the port mafia, you'll either have to join a powerful faction, or join the port mafia itself. With your combat skills, the port mafia boss might not be so forgiving toward you. However, the most likely possibility is. Dazai Osamu's expression took on a dark, sinister tone, his voice lively as he said, "The people you saved will still die. Wasted effort, risking your own life." How would this person react once they understood that? Ahead, Yakimaru continued walking without pause, not even breaking his stride or heartbeat. The reason was simple. Do you expect a blind and deaf person to listen to someone talking behind them? Dazai Osamu's face fell in disappointment. Not a single reaction. How frustrating. Dazai Osamu, compared to Yakimaru, was a bit shorter. Frustrated, he moved closer to inspect Yakimaru's ears. Suddenly, his gaze froze. It was late April, during the cold spring period, with a significant difference in temperature between day and night. Most of Yakimaru's skin was covered in bandages, but under his black hair, his ears were still snow-white, matching the pale complexion of his face. There wasn't a trace of living color. Upon closer inspection, Dazai noticed that both ears lacked the usual softness they should have. Dazai Osamu moved even closer, maintaining just enough distance, curious to observe these strange ears. Yakimaru stopped, a question forming in his mind. He didn't understand why this life flame had suddenly come so close to him, when it had always kept its distance before. Dazai Osamu grabbed Yakimaru's ear, and with a careless tug, it came off. Now face to face with Yakimaru, who was missing an ear, Dazai found himself being intensely stared at by Yakimaru, though it was hard to tell how real the expression was. Dazai Osamu. Awkward silence. Thick-skinned, Dazai quickly reattached the ear, saying, "It was too loose, let me press it down for you." Taking the opportunity, his fingers brushed against Yakimaru's face. The cold mask lacked the warmth of a human body, but the skin beneath the ear had a living person's warmth. The fit between the mask and the skin was remarkably seamless. After reattaching both ears, Yakimaru calmly pressed them down without any fuss and continued his search for a clean water source. Dazai Osamu, momentarily distracted, kicked at the sand as he pondered whether to take advantage of the port mafia's impending search for Yakimaru and infiltrate the organization. The port mafia was undoubtedly dangerous right now, but his ability was enough to keep him safe. As for Yakimaru, to put it bluntly, he didn't even have real ears. If he had any sense, joining the port mafia might be his best chance for survival. What exactly are you trying to do here? Dazai Osamu realized he had followed Yakimaru for so long, only to end up in a desolate place without a single light in sight. For once, he felt a hint of doubt about his own judgment. What was the other person trying to do? Today had been full of unexpected events, and Dazai's curiosity about Yokohama had only grown. Nowhere else seemed as interesting as this place. Relying on the fact that Yakimaru couldn't hear him, he intentionally said, "Are you planning to reveal your true face and kill me?" "Makes sense. Once I'm dead, no one will know your whereabouts, and you could escape Yokohama by morning." Yakimaru had no idea the person beside him was muttering endlessly. He squatted down, lifted some river water, and was about to drink it. Dazai Osamu, disgusted, remarked, "Are you really going to drink such dirty water? Do you actually trust Japan's rivers?" Dazai Osamu instantly stopped talking. It was simple. Beneath Yakimaru's mask, there wasn't even skin on his mouth. Grotesque veins and flesh stretched across his bones, and his gleaming white teeth were exposed. The way he drank was by tilting his head back, not lowering it to sip. When his mouth opened, even his tongue was missing. The difference between Yakimaru's usual refined face and this horrifying sight was staggering. Dazai Osamu steadied his breath, suppressing the slight tremor. Not only did he not step away, but he even turned to watch him closely. However, Yakimaru didn't give him much time to observe further. He quickly reattached the mask, covering his jaw, and returned to his usual handsome appearance. Yakimaru quietly waited for Dazai to leave. Anyone seeing his real face for the first time would normally be terrified by such an inhuman appearance. Except for Jukai. Perhaps, in the future, there will be one more, Dororo. At the upper reaches of the Tsurumi River, in a quiet, unnoticed spot by the riverbank, a black-haired boy squatted on the ground. Another boy, even younger than him, bent over and, after some thought, spoke brutally honest words. "Your face is really ugly. But still." Upon their first meeting, Dazai Osamu, who casually followed a stranger, helped him wipe the mask clean from river water and pulled him to his feet. "I'm hungry. Hurry up and treat me to something. The world is full of ugliness. Strip away the outer skin, and who would be more beautiful than anyone else?" Yakimaru felt someone grasp his hand, and a warm current surged in his heart. He suddenly had a strong desire to know what the other person was saying. In the darkness of his world, only this pure, flawless soul flame radiated light, illuminating even the lakes and ponds around him. "Who are you? Are you the Dororo I've been searching for?" He wasn't sure, but he knew that if he had lips, he would be smiling right now. "Hello, I am Yakimaru. A person mistreated by the malice of the world, who in the future would strive to treat the world kindly. Thank you for coming into my life." Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3, Your Name. The result. In front of the fish died without closing its eyes. In the end, Dazai Osamu treated him, buying some convenience store food to bring back and eat together with him. Considering that this person didn't have a tongue, Dazai Osamu gave the cheapest rice ball to Yakimaru, and he himself sat on a dry rock, eating a microwaved crab meat rice ball. After hastily filling his stomach, Dazai Osamu rummaged through his pockets and found only 2 500-yen coins. How tragic! If he didn't want to starve to death, he'd need to find himself a sponsor. "You look even poorer than me." Dazai Osamu sized up Yakimaru from head to toe, confirming he was just a poor wretch. "If I sold you, the port mafia might give me enough money, enough for me to eat instant noodles." He waved his 5 fingers in front of Yakimaru's vacant eyes, confirming the other was truly both mute and deaf, perfect for selling. With malicious amusement, Dazai Osamu said, "If you disagree, shake your head. If you agree, just stay still." "Great, he agrees." Yakimaru was like a puppet that could breathe, sitting there, completely indifferent as Dazai Osamu pulled and tugged at him. Dazai Osamu continuously tested the abnormalities, on his body, sometimes massaging his arm, other times pulling out a strand of black hair and blowing it towards the river. As long as his mask wasn't removed, this boy was of superior quality. In the reflection of the distant city's lights on the riverbank, Dazai-Osamu's interest peaked again. A cold wind from the other side of the river made him shiver, and he instinctively glanced at the desolate, quiet surface of the water. "What do you think about us entering the water before the flowers bloom in spring?" He turned his head to ask Yakimaru. In Yakimaru's eyes, the flickering white flame seemed to be blown by the wind, wilting down. It looked like a sign of illness. Yakimaru suddenly stood up, showcasing his outdoor skills by building a stone circle by the damp riverside, finding dry leaves and branches, and in front of Dazai-Osamu, started a fire. The firelight illuminated Dazai-Osamu's face, dispelling some of the spring chill. Dazai-Osamu poked the fire with a branch. "Instead of starting a fire by the river, wouldn't it be better to find a warmer place to stay?" Saying this, he pouted. "I forgot you can't talk and can't hear my voice." With decisive action, Dazai-Osamu completely ignored the other's opinion, once again grabbing his hand while also assessing the bandages wrapped around this person, which were similar to his own, tied up so sloppily. "Next time, use proper bandages. Let's go." Stomping out the fire, Dazai-Osamu easily led Yakimaru away, thinking to himself, "This person is too easy to handle." Yakimaru glanced at the fire that had once again sparked with the vitality of life and silently felt content. That night, Yakimaru didn't stay outdoors or in a corner, but was taken by Dazai-Osamu to a nearby vacant room. Dazai-Osamu effortlessly picked the lock, drew the curtains, and casually filled the bathtub with water, firmly insisting that this newly acquainted person get in and wash himself, inside and out. "How long has it been since you last had a bath?" With a bang, the bathroom door closed, leaving Yakimaru standing inside, bewildered. A moment later, he understood. It was bath time. Through the bathroom door, Dazai-Osamu heard the sound of water splashing and sighed in relief. Not that dumb after all. No, a truly stupid person wouldn't be able to survive on their own. Leaning against the door, the brown-haired boy felt an itch of curiosity, both because he hadn't seen the full face and because the other's appearance was so terrifying. He was genuinely curious whether there were a pair of eyes beneath the mask. If there were, had this person gotten used to having his vision blocked by the mask, or had he always been in a state of blindness? Dazai-Osamu muttered, "I just get the feeling that looking at him will give me nightmares." It was too incredible. A person who was deaf, mute, and blind wasn't all that rare, but someone with such elevated combat skills, he'd never heard of that before. He pinched the air, confirming the feeling ahead of him. Great, the other person's limbs also had issues. He believed that if the mask was taken off and the person wore different clothes, they could walk in front of the mafia and not be recognized, assuming the mafia members wouldn't be so shocked that they'd immediately open fire. Dazai-Osamu chuckled and went to find a set of pajamas for him. Without caring whether Yakimaru agreed or not, Dazai-Osamu pretended to knock on the door, twisted the handle, and entered, placing the simplest set of pajamas directly on the head of the expressionless Yakimaru, who was sitting in the bathtub. "For you." For a moment, he looked exactly like a Japanese bath floater. Dazai-Osamu quickly glanced at Yakimaru's limbs soaking in the warm water, and his pupils suddenly contracted. There were 2 joint lines across his shoulders. On his lower abdomen, near the groin area, there were 2 more. "You. How did he survive?" After washing his dirty clothes, Yakimaru emerged from the bathroom. The woman's belted nightgown fit him without any sense of awkwardness. His chest, exposed beneath the thin white fabric, and his loose hair, black and draped over his shoulders, made him look like a youth recovering from external injuries, freshly bathed. He appeared so clean and refreshed that it could almost make one forget all the scars and disabilities on his body. Dazai-Osamu, sitting on the sofa while stifling a yawn, glanced at him. Yakimaru then instinctively sat down beside him. Dazai-Osamu immediately asked Yakimaru, "How did you know I was here?" There was no need for Yakimaru to answer. Dazai-Osamu walked behind the sofa, not making a single sound, yet Yakimaru immediately turned his head toward him, even more alert than someone with sight. Dazai-Osamu picked up a fruit knife from the coffee table and brought it to Yakimaru's neck, stopping at the throat. No reaction. He spoke in a strange tone. Facing the calm Yakimaru, Dazai-Osamu briefly considered actually stabbing him, just to see his reaction. However, killing someone he found intriguing out of spite was something he couldn't bring himself to do, at least not yet. Alright, I get it, Dazai-Osamu said, letting go of the fruit knife. As if to retaliate for Yakimaru's calm demeanor, he took Yakimaru's ear, then pressed it back. He figured he wouldn't come across anyone with a better temperament than Yakimaru. You can sense danger, and feel my presence. He added one more sentence. You can see life. The reason you specifically eat raw creatures is because you can perceive signs of life in them. With just a few words, he uncovered the nature of Yakimaru's abilities. Dazai-Osamu leaned over the back of the sofa, relaxing as he hugged a cushion. His sharp eyes, unbound by the bandages, moved as his curiosity about Yakimaru's background rose to the forefront. What made him feel even more at ease was the fact that he didn't need to hide anything or pretend. He could act however he wanted, since this person couldn't see him at all. An idea arose, and Dazai-Osamu rushed over to grab the cactus raised by the owner of the house. Here, what do you see this as? What Yakimaru saw was the life force of a plant, a faint white light, its color about to be overtaken by the other person's life flame. Sticking to his silent and reserved character, he made no movement. Dazai-Osamu, on the other hand, grabbed a handful of Yakimaru's wet hair with one hand, looking at him with anticipation. Yakimaru was puzzled. Thinking that this might be an attempt at lively interaction from Dororo's energetic personality, he figured that trying to communicate with him must be exhausting. So, he couldn't keep up the silent, wooden act. Yakimaru took the cactus from Dazai-Osamu's hands and, under his surprised gaze, placed it on the table. Dazai-Osamu stretched out his words, so you did see it, huh? It isn't an ability. It was something naturally ingrained. No, it was more like a skill honed through experiences and innate talent. I'm too sleepy, no more games. Dazai-Osamu, acting on a whim, tossed Yakimaru onto the sofa, not caring what his name was or whether he would be offended. He then went off to sleep in the guest room. In the living room, Yakimaru touched the cactus, carefully plucking off something from it, and eventually ate it. Is this food that Dororo gave me? A lovely misunderstanding. Daytime. Dazai-Osamu followed Yakimaru near the Suribachi district, where Yakimaru was searching for evil entities. Whenever he encountered a life flame that was turbid and corrupt, he would deliver a blow but generally wouldn't deal a fatal strike. Before long, Dazai-Osamu used his own methods to find out that Yakimaru had recently gained a reputation in this poor neighborhood. The boy with crippled hands and swordsmanship. The one who beats up villains from outside. The one hunted by Sheep King half a month ago. Dazai-Osamu rested his chin on his hands, sitting on the stairs, watching Yakimaru beat people up. Compared to his own situation in Yokohama, Yakimaru had fared surprisingly well over the past half-month. In such a short time, he had already been accepted by the typically xenophobic Suribachi district. It seemed unbelievable, as Suribachi wasn't welcoming to outsiders. Could it be that he's just too pitiful? The people who abandoned the world, and the world abandoned them, hid in the Suribachi district. They stole, robbed, murdered, trafficked people, smuggled weapons. Gradually, they would accept any filthy way of survival. This place directly bordered Yokohama's underworld. When Dazai first learned about it, he didn't want to go because he disliked the unreasonable number of thugs here. Finished fighting? Seeing the black-haired boy swiftly running over, Dazai-Osamu pointed behind him in confusion. There are still a few you haven't finished off, right? If I'm not mistaken, they're repeat offenders who love robbing. He didn't finish his sentence. My hair! Dazai-Osamu exclaimed as Yakimaru lifted him up and took off running. Yakimaru's pace was top tier, running at a breakneck speed without asking for any input, moving with the instincts of a wild animal sensing danger. Dazai-Osamu tried to lift his head and look back. A mass of red, explosive light was rushing toward them from a distance, brimming with murderous intent. An enemy? Yakimaru's sharp instincts always seemed better, allowing him to avoid in time whenever Nakahara Chiya got close. Having received intelligence and now in pursuit, Nakahara Chiya kicked off a wall, which immediately cracked. He held back his rage, shouting, "If you're so tough, stop running, you bastard." The villains lying on the ground groaned in pain, trying to crawl out of the vicious Sheep King's attack range. When Nakahara Chiya glanced down, he laughed in anger. "Am I really that terrifying?" The fiery young man grinned menacingly, cold blue light gleaming from under his hood. "If he's beating you, you must be real scum who've done all sorts of evil. I noticed he didn't hit you hard enough, you're still able to crawl. On my turf, I don't need lowlifes like you messing around." Another vicious blow landed. After releasing his pent-up energy, Nakahara Chiya dusted off his hands and walked away. Over on the other side, having narrowly escaped danger, Yakimaru put down the person he had been carrying. Dazai-Osamu rubbed his stomach but didn't bother asking what had caused the commotion. His interest quickly shifted as he pointed to an old bookstore in Suribachi. "Let's check that place out." At the second-hand bookstore, Dazai-Osamu successfully found a lot of books that were banned. Yakimaru sat at the shop's entrance, looking like a guardian deity, which frightened the smoking shopkeeper. The shopkeeper snuffed out his cigarette, glanced at Yakimaru's hands, then turned to look at Dazai-Osamu, who was busy browsing through the books. "Aren't you going to run?" The shopkeeper said to Yakimaru, then suddenly mocked himself, "Well, you're really strong. Not like the rest of us who lose our nerve the moment we hear that the port mafia is hunting someone down." Dazai-Osamu approached with a smile. "What are you talking about? The port mafia?" The shopkeeper quickly hushed him. "Keep your voice down." Suppressing his smoking urge, the shopkeeper explained the port mafia's manhunt for a young boy equipped with swords. He wasn't considered to be particularly kind, he just hoped the situation wouldn't bring trouble to Suribachi. "You say you're his friend, right? Then advise him to leave Suribachi quickly." "So that's how it is." Dazai-Osamu's face lit up with an expression of sudden realization, as fake as it could be, but the unfamiliar shopkeeper couldn't tell. Next, Dazai flashed a smile that made the shopkeeper break into a cold sweat. "For you to say that means Suribachi is a place even the port mafia can't easily invade. Otherwise, they would have just come in and grabbed him, without causing unnecessary chaos. I've heard that the most famous person in Suribachi is called the Sheep King. The port mafia must have suffered at his hands before and fears him. If the two sides were to start a fight in Suribachi, this bookstore, sitting right next to the district, might end up in the crossfire." No longer paying attention to the shopkeeper, Dazai-Osamu stuffed something into Yakimaru's clothing, waved his hand in farewell, and said, "We're leaving right away, and consider this book a gift from you to us." The shopkeeper's face twisted with displeasure, but there was nothing he could do, he just wanted these two troublemakers to leave quickly. Yakimaru reached into his chest to touch the book, but Dazai-Osamu dragged him away. As they walked, Dazai-Osamu laughed and said, "Thanks to your reputation in Suribachi, after you escaped the Sheep King's pursuit, the port mafia will now regard you even more highly." Just as they were about to leave the boundaries of Suribachi, Dazai stepped on the dividing line, turned to Yakimaru, and said, "The choice is yours." Dazai-Osamu let go of his hand, standing just outside the boundary line. "Follow me, and I'll help you end the manhunt. Or stay in Suribachi and join the sheep." The Sheep King is the leader of Suribachi's youth self-defense organization. Seeing your physical condition, his hatred for you isn't as severe as you might think. Every time he comes for you, he comes alone. It seems he's more interested in fighting you than seeking revenge. After presenting the second option and saying a lot of words, Dazai-Osamu watched as Yakimaru directly stepped over the boundary line, shattering the choice. Yakimaru, using every ounce of will to survive, had always trusted his sixth sense. The other had stopped. That meant he was waiting for him to come. Realizing he had walked up to the life flame beside him, and the other person wasn't leading him anymore, Yakimaru tilted his head to see him. The pure white flame burned so brightly it seemed like it was about to burn itself up. No, you can't. Yakimaru vaguely recalled that Dororo had some kind of unique background, not like his own as a nomad. With his cold right hand, he proactively grasped the person who had joined him the day before. You must continue to live. Yakimaru's pure will, driven by the effort to survive, made Dazai Osamu, whose mind was exceptionally sharp, suddenly feel like he couldn't breathe. Such a strong desire to survive. For him, it was too overwhelming. What meaning does life hold anyway? Dazai Osamu gasped for breath, giving up as he turned his head, calmly staring at the person who couldn't even see him. Let's go. After walking a few steps, Dazai Osamu pulled him over to a spot on the sandy shore. First, tell me your name, and I'll figure out a way to give you a fake identity. Yakimaru, for a moment, seemed to connect with him on a deeper level. Reborn into this world, having forgotten his old name, the boy crouched down and began writing his new name, one stroke at a time, in the sand. Yakimaru. Born to be sacrificed to the demon gods by his father, yet saved by the protection of Kangnan Bodhisattva. This was Yakimaru's simple past. Dazai Osamu remembered the name and remarked, Yakimaru? It doesn't sound very lucky. Japan has always feared demons. Throughout history, stories of demons never ceased. It was said that demons feared the vital energy of strong men and wouldn't dare approach those with fierce, terrifying auras. Dazai Osamu speculated, but someone like you, even demons would probably be scared of. If heaven can't kill you, how could demons kill you? Before the Port Mafia members could show up, Dazai Osamu hurriedly led the easily deceived Yakimaru away. Enough talking. We can't let them catch us. This time, it was Yakimaru who was being dragged along at full speed by Dazai Osamu. While running lightly, Yakimaru didn't break a sweat, his stamina far surpassing Dazai Osamu's. He noticed that the other person always liked to grab his left hand, so he subtly shifted his left hand upward, drawing the other's attention. And just like that, it easily slipped from his grasp. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4, Facing Evil Head-On. To deal with the Port Mafia, the days of hiding and dodging for the two of them inevitably come. For Yakimaru, when facing challenges, he would express his doubts by simply standing in place, while Dazai Osamu responded with straightforward clarity. He directly took Yakimaru to a battlefield, using his formidable combat abilities to eliminate some rival organizations of the Port Mafia, thereby extending a gesture of goodwill toward the Port Mafia. No organization would want a powerful enemy. However, they would prefer a strong ally with a fatal weakness to exploit. Such a submissive stance would be unacceptable to those with an arrogant personality or a bright and upright mindset. Dazai Osamu could only conclude that Yakimaru did not belong to either of these categories, completely outside the realm of ordinary human judgment. For Yakimaru, things were reduced to the simplest form of life flames. The world was nothing more than that. Life or death, good or evil, safety or danger. He didn't need to ponder too many things. His instincts would avoid fatal danger, leaving fate to the heavens, while he himself would continue growing toward his goal of slaying the demon gods. During this time, Dazai Osamu took on the role of Yakimaru's guide, while also conveniently responsible for picking up his prosthetics, outwardly displaying that Yakimaru was obedient to him, though it was a false impression. Fine then. He admitted that it wasn't exactly false. Yakimaru didn't oppose his actions. It was as if he were a delicate, indifferent puppet, and the strings were in Dazai's hands, making him enjoy testing how much Yakimaru trusted him. However, this person occasionally had moments of unpredictability. If Dazai moved out of his field of vision or let go of his hand, Yakimaru would act on his own, unintentionally ruining Dazai Osamu's carefully laid plans. This was basically like a counterfeit, subpar automaton sold by an unscrupulous merchant. Dazai-Osamu silently grumbled to himself. Because of this, he abandoned his earlier plan, to infiltrate the port mafia by faking a suicide or an injury. While this method had the highest chance of success, the unpredictability of Yakimaru was too great. He couldn't be certain that if he separated from Yakimaru for a few days, someone else wouldn't come along and take him away. Most importantly, he didn't want to admit that he didn't want the port mafia to turn Yakimaru into some kind of human weapon. Weapons are easily damaged. Not yet 14 years old, Dazai-Osamu fiercely thought to himself, even if this person is a weapon, he should be my weapon. How could he be left to those black-suited mafia thugs to command? Yakimaru, I've already extended an olive branch to the port mafia and demonstrated your value. Now, we just wait for the higher-ups in the port mafia to make their decision, whether to continue hunting us or send someone to make contact. Dazai-Osamu shoved a steaming bowl of instant noodles into Yakimaru's hands, excitedly guiding his fingers to hold the chopsticks, oddly feeling like he was playing with dolls just like little girls do. Pfft, I'm not that childish. Yakimaru's face, surrounded by the steam from the instant noodles, was softened by the mist, making his features appear gentler. After fumbling a few times, he quickly mastered how to use the chopsticks. He removed the mask. Yakimaru revealed a portion of his disfigured jaw and mouth, then began eating. His teeth barely managed to bite through the noodles, otherwise, the noodles would have been difficult to swallow whole. This was Dazai-Osamu's way of gradually adjusting Yakimaru's eating habits. Dazai-Osamu pulled out a napkin and wiped Yakimaru's face, showing a certain fondness for his indifferent expression behind the mask. If I damage this highly realistic mask of yours, I wouldn't even know where to go to get a second one made. An indifferent Yakimaru could instill fear in people. This way, no one would truly understand Yakimaru's real condition, keeping others at a distance from him. Unable to hear Dazai-Osamu's sweet words or the malicious thoughts in his heart, Yakimaru, in a way, was distanced from deception, making him the last person a manipulator would want to deal with. Of course, at this time, Dazai-Osamu barely understood the art of manipulation and hadn't received any formal training. He mostly relied on his own powers of observation and a few learned tricks to easily achieve his goals. I don't have much knowledge in the medical field, and you have no way to answer me, Dazai-Osamu said, resting his chin on his hand, staring intently at the part of the face he had looked at many times before, immune to its shocking appearance. I think your condition is similar to someone who's had their skin peeled off, tongue cut out, eyes gouged, and limbs hacked off. Such a tragic thing, yet coming from Dazai-Osamu's mouth, it felt so light and without substance. Yakimaru continued eating his noodles, as usual, not needing to say anything, casually pretending to be unlearned. What kind of person were you before? When did you become like this, and where did you learn to fight? Who equipped you with the mask and prosthetics? Being able to connect nerves on such a scale, making them function as limbs, that's some impressive skill. I've never heard of anything like it. I'm so curious. Dazai-Osamu sounded like a student with an intense thirst for knowledge, but unfortunately, the person in front of him wasn't a teacher. Yakimaru placed the empty bowl on the ground, mentally exhausted. This place was an abandoned warehouse, but to him, it felt like a safe area for resting. There were no red flames nearby. Hugging his knees, Yakimaru sat down and quickly fell into a state of sleep. Dazai-Osamu. After a while, Dazai-Osamu picked up the bowl of instant noodles that he had spiked with sleeping medication and saw that all the broth had been drunk. I couldn't think of another way to leave you temporarily, Dazai-Osamu muttered. He thought moving Yakimaru would be quite a hassle, but to his surprise, it was unexpectedly light. He carried Yakimaru to a corner, covered him with a cloth bag, leaving breathing holes, and piled some broken crates around him. Mission accomplished. As he was leaving, Dazai-Osamu spotted a stray cat walking by, shifted his gaze away, and hit his tracks as he went off to gather information. The calico cat, pretending to be a stray, succeeded in its mission. It entered the warehouse, sniffing the air, and found the sleeping Yakimaru. Yakimaru's body stirred slightly, his senses alerting him. His instincts told him that another life flame was nearby. As Yakimaru vaguely noticed the small life flame of the calico cat, his consciousness once again sank into deep sleep. Meow. The calico cat quickly realized something was off. It used its front paw to prod Yakimaru's hand, which had fallen to the ground, feeling as cold and lifeless as a block of wood. This boy was usually so sharp, how could he be in such a defenseless state? After confirming that Dazai-Osamu had gone far away, the calico cat's body began to emit a glow of supernatural power, and its animal form slowly straightened up. A gentlemanly old man, dressed in a suit, now stood before Yakimaru. He glanced around, remembering the details of Dazai-Osamu's setup, and then proceeded to examine Yakimaru's worrying condition. Not long after, Natsume Soseki came to a startling conclusion. Has he been through impending torture and lost his limbs for over a decade? He undid the ragged clothes and bandages on Yakimaru's body, examining his limbs and torso, feeling the bones. It wasn't hard to discern that the stumps of the severed limbs had long since smoothed over, clearly the result of many years. The areas where the limbs had been cut off still retained normal muscle structure, with no signs of muscle atrophy or other complications typically caused by amputation. The boy's bones were clearly young, his whole body wrapped in bandages, without skin, appearing to be around 14 years old. Despite the rough, patchy clothes, the seams were finely stitched. The stumps are so smooth. Could someone have cruelly severed a child's limbs shortly after he was born? Natsume Soseki's eyes were filled with the heavy sorrow and helplessness of an old man unable to save the child. He almost couldn't bear to continue his examination. Facing the boy, with his mask and ears removed, revealing the disfigured and grotesque face, it was as though he was confronting the deepest questions of humanity. Any person with a conscience would find it impossible to calmly accept. This was reality, this was a crime. Dazai-Osamu didn't want to look at the face, but Natsume Soseki did. He reached out and placed the objects back on Yakimaru's body. The boy's body once again became flawless, with his mask fitting perfectly, creating the appearance of a handsome, well-proportioned face. It was as if it were saying that, had he grown up healthy, he would undoubtedly have been as remarkable as the sculpted mask he wore. Natsume Soseki also recognized that someone had trained Yakimaru, giving him his unique combat abilities. Even though he roughly figured out the situation, Natsume Soseki was still deeply concerned about Yakimaru's future. Anyone could easily abduct him, and fortunately, the one who had done so under his watch was a clever little rascal. The unfortunate thing was, that little rascal reminded him of a troublesome student he had once had, someone who easily strayed onto the wrong path. It would be best to conduct a thorough examination with proper equipment. He sighed. Various thoughts flashed through his mind, and he dismissed most of them, leaving only a few viable options. The calico cat's tail drooped, brushing past Yakimaru's ankle as it concealed its tracks before leaving the warehouse. It jumped to a suitable vantage point, perching on a branch. Unwilling to leave Yakimaru alone to sleep in the warehouse, the cat chose to keep watch outside. Dazai-Osamu hadn't been gone for more than 2 hours before he quickly returned. Still no results. He carefully inspected the warehouse and was surprised to notice a few tiny paw prints, evidence that a cat had been here. This wasn't too strange, he had spotted a cat when leaving earlier. Setting aside the bundle of Yakimaru's belongings, Dazai-Osamu rested his hands on his knees and couldn't help but smile. The black-haired boy, sitting on the ground, seemed to be sleeping with his eyes wide open. His breathing was steady, and his tattered clothes, illuminated by the dusty light filtering through the warehouse's cracks, gave him an appearance of being in a completely different, unknown world. In that world, there were no rivalries, no poverty or wealth, just the simple colors of black and white. Yet humanity is always filled with shades of black and white, Dazai-Osamu murmured, his gaze darkening slightly. After several busy days, with even more bandages added to his body, Dazai-Osamu sat down, using the startled Yakimaru as if he were a lifeless cushion. He mumbled, Don't fuss, I just want to sleep for a bit. Yakimaru's body rarely showed stiff reactions, and in fact, once he recognized who it was, he relaxed. The pure white life flame leaned against his left side, gently flickering. It seemed a bit unwell. He reached out toward the flame, and by coincidence, his hand brushed against the bandages on Dazai-Osamu's forehead. With just a light touch, the bandages quickly became stained with blood. Dazai-Osamu didn't move, but smiled and spoke to the one who couldn't hear. I accidentally took a fall, unlucky enough to hit my head on some rubble. Just waking up and unsure of what to do next, Yakimaru recalled the time when his adoptive father lay sick in bed. Back then, all he could do was sit beside him, waiting for him to recover. Even after the life flame recovered, it still appeared somewhat weak. People who are sick need care, don't they? Yakimaru accidentally touched the wound, letting it bleed freely, but soon his hand found Dazai-Osamu's head. At that moment, he gently stroked the head of the Dororo, who had piled of wounds and of unknown past. I will protect you. Dazai-Osamu tilted his head. Once again, he witnessed the characteristic of a semi-automatic puppet. The unexpected always happens at the most random moments. Then, he blinked his long eyelashes, Yakimaru's hand still resting on his head, revealing an expression of emptiness to the world. Imitating the other's posture, he hugged his knees, curling into his own small world, and closed his eyes to sleep, as if Yakimaru had switched to head massage mode. Not bad, except that his hair would end up a mess. With his unruly foreign locks, Dazai-Osamu gradually fell asleep. In his dreams, the murky world seemed to settle, separating into fragments that couldn't be called pure but could still be touched by light from the outside world. A semi-transparent dream. Looking through the hazy scenes at the world, could it be that the world would appear a little more beautiful? Dazai-Osamu couldn't tell. His experiences only led him to retreat and observe rather than actively engage with the world, especially the world of Yakimaru, who harbored such a strong desire to survive. At the Port Mafia, after a never-ending debate in the high-ups meeting, the boss's personal doctor approached an exhausted old man. Ignoring the bloodshot, furious gaze of the other, he offered his medical advice. Boss, you need to maintain a good mood to recover. Ah, Dr. Mori. The boss valued his own life more than anything else, and immediately his emotions leveled out, smoothing the wrinkles on his face. Help me to my room to rest. With this order, Mori Ogai naturally obeyed, supporting the old man who refused to sit in a wheelchair, leading him to the most securely guarded bedroom in the Port Mafia. There, he attended to the high-ranking boss as he went to rest. Over the past few months, the boss, who had developed trust in Mori Ogai, muttered, Dr. Mori, do you think I should listen to those members who say it's better to avoid unnecessary trouble and let go of that boy who challenged the Port Mafia? Mori Ogai bowed slightly and replied, your reputation is the reputation of the Port Mafia. Those words resonated deeply with the boss. Ever since his illness had worsened, his temper could no longer handle any kind of provocation. What he hated most was hearing others give him orders or tell him how the Port Mafia should be run. He was the boss of the Port Mafia, the dragon's head of Yokohama's underworld. Anyone who defied him should perish. I want him dead. The boss rasped, lifting his head. Boss, it said that boy has crippled hands and came from Suribachi. When he faced the Port Mafia's pursuit, he fled Suribachi in a state of panic, without direction. Our Port Mafia's authority remains intact. Mori Ogai calmly interrupted the boss, bringing warm water and medicine. In this way, he halted the boss's self-absorbed thoughts, persuading him to take the medicine that would leave him exhausted. The old man on the bed, now calmed, ceased his plans to further wreak havoc on Yokohama. Mori Ogai stood quietly at the bedside, gazing down at the aging boss. A flicker of killing intent arose. But it wasn't the right time yet. Mori Ogai nodded at the guard responsible for the boss's safety, not arousing suspicion. He picked up his medical kit and prepared to leave this place filled with murder and chaos. As he made his way out of the Port Mafia's headquarters, Mori Ogai returned to his clinic near Suribachi. Frustrated, he muttered, "The boss is getting more and more unhinged, completely ignoring the crumbling order in Yokohama. If this keeps up, Yokohama will fall into chaos, and the port mafia will be destroyed as well." He took out a hidden letter from his clinic and glanced at it one last time, reluctant to destroy it. "If my teacher requests it, I'll help this time." The man in the black suit under the white lab coat bowed his head with a smile. "I'm also quite interested in that little rascal daring to approach me. I wonder when he'll realize that what the port mafia members say is useless, while what I say has a bit more weight." Under his hand, a blonde girl with a displeased expression appeared, her head being patted. "The humanoid ability," Elise pouted, "Rintaro is up to no good again." "No, not at all," Mori Ogai denied. "Natsume-sensei's intention is for me to help the boy being hunted by the port mafia. He didn't ask me to do anything beyond that. Maybe Natsume-sensei has a new plan, and as his disciple, of course, I'll help him keep this boy safe." As for the others, they were not within the protection granted by Natsume-senseki's letter. Mori Ogai took Elise's hand. "Elise, let's go meet that little rascal." The clinic was closed. The voices of the middle-aged man and the blonde girl faded into the wind, leaving behind faint, indistinct words. "Maybe, it will be, waiting for the right moment." Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5, Battle with the Demon God Again. Not far away, the Yokohama Ferris wheel spun slowly. While Mori Ogai was out for a walk, he encountered Dazai Osamu. This time, the crippled boy being hunted was nowhere to be seen beside him. "You came to see me alone." The first sentence carried a subtle hint of danger, but Mori Ogai's tone became much friendlier with the next. "I thought it was your friend who needed a doctor. Although you also look like you could use some treatment, judging by how you wrap your bandages, it seems like your external injuries shouldn't be too much of a problem." This was the port mafia's private doctor, the infamous black-clad man of Yokohama's underworld, a middle-aged man with long hair and a beard, holding the hand of a blonde girl. He had a carefree appearance, yet his medical skills were impeccable. With just a glance, he could tell that Dazai Osamu, who was wrapped in bandages, only had superficial, low-level injuries. Intelligent people wouldn't render themselves unable to move, and though Dazai Osamu liked to flirt with death, he was careful to avoid causing any long-term illnesses or disabilities. It may seem hard to understand, but Dazai Osamu wasn't simply chasing death, he was searching for something besides life and death, perhaps hope, or perhaps something about human nature. In any case, there was no need to explain this to outsiders. Meeting Mori privately, Dazai Osamu appeared like a stubborn young boy wrapped in injuries, yet his white shirt and black trousers gave him the refined and elegant demeanor of someone raised in a well-off family. With a deceptive smile, he said, "Not a friend, Yakimaru is my puppet." "A puppet?" Mori Ogai, recalling recent rumors, asked gently, "He seems to listen to you and doesn't interact with others. What method did you use to achieve that?" Dazai Osamu smugly replied, "He only listens to me." Inwardly, Mori Ogai raised his estimation of Dazai Osamu's value, though he didn't reveal his scrutiny. One large fox and one small fox were testing each other. "I'm merely an ordinary doctor, lucky enough to have treated the port mafia boss a few times. I'm not really one of them. I understand your struggles, but alas, there's little I can do to help you. Dr. Mori, you're far too modest. Just hearing you speak, it's clear you're not like the cold-blooded mafia. After all, I'm just a doctor." That's right, Dr. Mori is quite well known in Yokohama's underworld. Your clinic is near Suribachi Street, and many who can't go to regular hospitals end up seeking out Dr. Mori, owing you many favors. I just scrape by to make a living. Sometimes, I don't even get paid for consultations. Really? Isn't that a bit too much? Yokohama's underworld is chaotic. For outsiders like yourselves staying here for a while, you'll surely come to understand Yokohama's unique culture. You really shouldn't provoke the port mafia during this time. Mori Ogai shook his head, feeling sympathy for another boy who shouldn't have been saved. Dazai Osamu fell into thought. From Dr. Mori's words, he had already extracted a lot of useful information. For instance, the port mafia was on the verge of extreme chaos, and even the higher-ups couldn't stop the boss from going mad, which explained why the kill order hadn't been revoked yet. In other words, they had gotten involved with the port mafia at the worst possible time, and solving this problem through conventional methods would be very difficult. An alternative method just happened to be right in front of him. Dazai Osamu lifted his eyes to look at the man in black, who was followed by a young blonde girl acting mischievously toward him. Titch. Dr. Mori must have a solution, right? He opened his mouth to ask for help. Under Mori Ogai's indifferent "I can't help you" attitude, the young boy suddenly spoke slyly. I think it's not that there's no solution, but that we're missing a moment of waiting. What are you trying to say? Mori Ogai finally looked at the boy with interest. Many people in Yokohama are dissatisfied with the port mafia. Dazai Osamu plainly stated, calmly exposing the dark side of Yokohama. From within the port mafia organization to the street vendors selling snacks, this organization has angered many, losing the public's favor. But because of the government's lack of effective control, the situation is now on the verge of spiraling out of control. Dazai Osamu said to Mori Ogai, once the port mafia is destroyed, those dangers will cease to exist. Mori Ogai, using a tolerance for Dazai's flaws tones, replied, that's not the case. The adult said, without the port mafia, Yokohama will only become more chaotic, so chaotic that it won't care about any of you, and so chaotic that you won't be able to live peacefully on this land in Yokohama anymore. The boy wrinkled his nose, that sounds really troublesome. Mori Ogai smiled and said, I'm just a humble man with the surname Mori, first name Ogai. May I ask for your name? Understanding the olive branch extended to him, the boy gazed at him with cold, rational eyes, his pupils reflecting the spinning wheels not far away. Within those sharp eyes, there was still a glimmer of light not completely swallowed by darkness. Beneath the surface of his condition, was Dazai Osamu, a person whose precious mind had yet to be fully shaped. I am Dazai Osamu. He had found him. Someone who could understand the current situation and was willing to bear the risks. Mori Ogai, kindly wrapping his words with deadly poison, gently asked, if I were to say that I have a solution, but it would require taking on some danger, would you be willing, for your friend, your puppet, to go to such lengths? Dazai Osamu suddenly stepped forward quickly, startling Mori Ogai, and Elise, alert, immediately stood in front of Mori Ogai to shield him. On Dazai Osamu's face was a mixture of joy and an intense enthusiasm for death. I love danger the most. Tell me, will it kill me? It will, yes. That's great. He cheered, his smile radiant as he said, I knew Mori-san was a good person. In a short amount of time, this man had gained the trust of the port mafia's boss, a man in black with inscrutable intentions. Their goals were indeed aligned. Yakimaru wasn't slow when it came to matters concerning himself. Lately, he had been feeling sleepy more often, indicating that either something unusual was happening with his body, or there was an issue with the food he was consuming. He was always willing to trust the other person, the pure life flame would never be wrong. That person must be Dororo. As long as there weren't any anomalies like someone transmigrating, the life flame represents a person's soul. After all, who could successfully disguise a soul as pure? Yakimaru, with his keen senses, knew very well that someone who had never killed, someone harmless, posed no threat. In the face of this malicious world, the only thing he could trust was the power he had gained in this life. Each time he woke up, Yakimaru's body, with its excellent resilience, quickly adapted to the effects of the sleeping drugs, building up a tolerance. He leaned against the corner of the wall, and in the confined space, his keen senses lost more than half of their effectiveness. He had no specific concept of time, only counting the lonely numbers, slowly reciting from 1 to 100. From 100 to 1,000. From 1,000 to 10,000. Sometimes, Yakimaru felt as if he truly was just a simulated puppet, his soul hidden within his damaged body, without arms or legs, like a person subjected to the ancient punishment of human stumps. He was close to forgetting what normal sensation felt like. 14 years had passed, and even the phantom pains of his spirit were fading. During battles, he no longer cared about the bloodshed. If he were to be thrown into the infinite loop of the main god space, would his mental strength surpass 1,000? No, he hadn't yet developed the ability to scan with his mind. The limits were too vast. Yakimaru could no longer afford to wait. If Dororo encountered danger, wouldn't that mean he would be forced to sit idly by? After all, in a young boy's story, the hero saving the damsel in distress is never missing. He shoved past the obstacle that Dazai-Osamu had set up, leaping over the crate, his face cold and emotionless as he walked out. Day and night had lost their meaning. In his eyes, there was only the life flame. He wanted to find that pure white flame of life. When Dazai-Osamu returns as normal, what he saw was the scene after Yakimaru getting lost. It was the first time he had been busy for someone else for so long, and upon returning to find the person missing, Dazai-Osamu felt a chill in his heart. Dazai-Osamu gritted his teeth. Next time, I'll plant a tracker. Luckily, though there wasn't a tracker, he had placed a GPS device on Yakimaru, ensuring that Yakimaru didn't slip out of his control. Dazai-Osamu activated the GPS and saw the red dot move to its location. It's Suribachi Street. Not only did Dazai-Osamu know that Yakimaru liked going to Suribachi Street, but Yakimaru also knew that once the other couldn't find him, there was a very high chance he would come to Suribachi Street to look for him. Suribachi Street was the place Yakimaru was most familiar with at the moment, where the small, tightly packed houses, arranged like thick teeth, made it incredibly convenient for jumping and climbing. Though the street was crowded with people, there was little need for concern. As long as the life flames had a red glow, he could simply knock them out in one hit. It's possible that as long as he kept beating these people up, he could draw out a weaker demon god. This time, the unfortunate victims were members of the sheep organization. Killing isn't an exclusive privilege of adults. The younger the child, the more incomplete their worldview. When they do bad things, it often comes from a momentary impulse, and once it's over, their fear and terror don't last long. Shirase had been part of the sheep for many years and was one of the founding members. After picking up the mysterious Nakahara Chuya on Suribachi Street, he and the other members of the sheep had gained a certain level of reputation on Suribachi Street. Adults without any background didn't even have the courage to bully them. A month ago, Shirase accidentally killed someone who had been his target for robbery. Luckily, no one saw it happen, and he was able to shift the blame onto others on Suribachi Street. Returning to the sheep's base, Shirase had moments of fear and anxiety, terrified that Nakahara Chuya would find out, since they all knew Nakahara Chuya didn't like the senseless killing of innocents. He had even been furious with their acts of robbery. Fortunately, the powerful Nakahara Chuya, who could crush any enemy, didn't notice anything wrong with Shirase. Instead, upon hearing that someone had died, he advised everyone to be cautious when going out and not to give the enemy any chances to take advantage. Within just a few weekends, the fear in his heart completely disappeared. Killing someone wasn't such a big deal after all. Where was all that seriousness Chuya talked about, like how killing an innocent would leave you feeling regret and guilt for the rest of your life? None of that happened. Killing meant he no longer had to worry about his robbery targets seeking revenge. Shirase thought he had matured, and he even imagined bragging to his comrades about the feeling of killing someone in the future. But without his knowledge, the life flame now glowed with a red light, tainting his already impure soul with sin. Help! Chuya won't forgive you. Shirase was beaten terribly by Yakimaru, with tears and snot streaming down his face, his cries echoing far and wide. Many residents of Suribachi Street, delighting in his misfortune, quickly recognized the silver-haired boy being dealt with by Yakimaru as Shirase from the sheep organization. Not only that, Some residents who were familiar with special abilities whispered, "Does that boy have the ability to distinguish between good and evil? Why can he always find those notorious thugs?" Others took the opportunity to mock, saying, "I knew Shirase wasn't anything good, but I didn't expect him to be such a coward. Getting beaten and still yelling out loud, afraid people won't hear the great name of the Sheep King, huh?" Without the Sheep King, this organization, formed by a group of ordinary boys for self-defense, would never have lasted until today. But, the power to control gravity is truly strong. Chuya, Shirase is getting beaten up. In the sheep's base, a member who didn't dare go to the rescue rushed back, shouting in panic. Nakahara Chuya, who was sitting in the base playing a video game, looked up. Huh? He bent his knees and stretched out his legs to stand up, tossing the newly bought video game console onto the chair, instantly making the other boys in the sheep excitedly scramble to be next to play. Nakahara Chuya's first reaction was that Shirase must have messed with the wrong person, provoking someone he shouldn't have. However, the member of the sheep who reported back insisted, Shirase didn't do anything. We were just walking down the street when he was suddenly knocked to the ground by someone. I couldn't even fight back against that person. Chuya, hurry up, he's going to be beaten to death. Before Nakahara Chuya even reached the scene, he could already hear Shirase's continuous screams of pain. Furious, he shouted, "Who dares to go against the sheep?" And with that, he rushed ahead. The moment he laid eyes on the scene, he froze for a second, clearly seeing that the person beating Shirase was none other than Yakimaru. "So it's you." Yakimaru hadn't even bothered to draw his blade while dealing with Shirase. With just his fists and feet, he easily subdued him. Through the fight, he could see the red glow of Shirase's life flame, and he was preparing to lie in wait, expecting the next wave of similar individuals to appear. As expected, when the color-changing demon god appeared, Yakimaru once again confirmed that evildoers and demon gods were always tightly connected. Every life flame with a red glow should not be spared. Those people were either aiding tyrants in their atrocities or had blood-stained hands from killing, completely undeserving of Yakimaru's sympathy. After all, who would feel sympathy for Yakimaru, who had become this way because of the demon gods? Just as Yakimaru made up his mind to once again risk his life to test the strength of the demon god, Nakahara Chuya didn't immediately lash out in anger. Instead, he looked in Shirase's direction with a trace of doubt in his eyes. "Why did you beat him? Shirase hasn't killed anyone like I have, he shouldn't have been attacked by you." After paying close attention for so many days, Nakahara Chuya finally uncovered the truth behind the attacks on him. It turns out that the targets in Suribachi Street were chosen based on a single criterion, those whose hands were stained with blood and had committed countless wrongdoings. Occasionally, the wrong person might get attacked, but the people in Suribachi Street generally agreed that those people had abandoned their evil ways and sought redemption. Nakahara Chuya thought about this and felt helpless. Was he just one of the rare cases accidentally harmed by the other person? But the people he killed were all bad people. Yakimaru didn't care about others' opinions. He charged straight at Nakahara Chuya, his dim gray-brown eyes giving off an air of arrogance, fully focused on his determined task. Nakahara Chuya, hands still in his pockets, unleashed his deep red special ability without hesitation. Gravity manipulation. Anything he touched could have its gravity manipulated by him. Yakimaru swung his arm, but the change in gravity altered the direction of his attack. He quickly adjusted, avoiding everything tainted with the red force. His sharp agility made Nakahara Chuya click his tongue in frustration, sensing trouble. His attacks couldn't land on the opponent, and the opponent couldn't hit him either. His manipulation of gravity was being evaded, while he knew nothing about this person except for the blades attached to their arms. Who knows if the ability to distinguish between good and evil, such an abstract concept, could manifest into a tangible power? What if it was an ability specifically targeting evildoers? In short, Nakahara Chuya held some reservations and didn't dare to relentlessly pursue the fight as he usually would. Yes, he had killed people, but after understanding the nature of the opponent's targets, his hostility faded. Let's leave a few good people in this world. As for Shirase, if Nakahara Chuya hadn't guessed wrong, Shirase probably killed someone recently. Nakahara Chuya's internal thoughts were difficult to put into words. His bright blue eyes dimmed slightly, and once again, he released his fighting spirit. Under the oppressive force of the Sheep King's serious demeanor on Suribachi Street, Yakimaru clearly struggled. Unable to use his blades for fear of damage, he had to focus on protecting his limbs in hand-to-hand combat. A new round of engagement was destined to not last long. Yakimaru was highly aware of his surroundings, but no sooner had his feet touched the ground that it was quickly covered in red. He leaped up, reacting with incredible speed, surpassing Nakahara Chuya's ability release speed. Nakahara Chuya, slightly delayed but strategic, was already in midair, twisting as he extended a leg. Get down here. Yakimaru was struck in the back by Nakahara Chuya's kick, sending him crashing toward the ground. Missing the chance to evade, Yakimaru's legs sank down as the red glow of the special ability quickly enveloped his body. His body soon bent under what felt like the weight of hundreds of pounds, forcing him to crouch. This was Nakahara Chuya showing mercy, refraining from shattering his opponent's body. The brilliant display of hand-to-hand combat reshaped the Suribachi Street residents' perception of the Sheep King. This young man, who had grown up on Suribachi Street, possessed not only a powerful special ability but also exceptional martial arts skills and strategic combat planning. Still, it felt a bit like bullying. Yakimaru's martial arts were clearly superior to the Sheep King's, yet he was constantly at a disadvantage. It gave the impression of a non-ability user fiercely challenging a master with special abilities. Each minute of endurance felt like an explosion of human potential. Finally, after all this time, I've caught you. Nakahara Chuya lifted his chin, looking like a classic thug under the hood of his hoodie, ready to rough someone up. He walked toward Yakimaru, temporarily forgetting about Shirase, his nerves tightened, constantly alert for any sudden developments. Before he could take another step closer, Yakimaru was already stimulated by the dark red life flame of the demon god. His body trembled slightly, his expression cold and indifferent, as he relentlessly forced himself away from the presence of the demon god. I cannot be defeated by the demon god. I want to reclaim the body parts I've lost. I want to touch this world again. If necessary. I'm willing to abandon my current limbs. As Yakimaru concentrated all his willpower to resist, the remnants of the demon god's red energy within him surged, glowing like a flickering candlelight. This diminished the gravitational ability covering his entire body significantly. Is it similar to Arahabaki? Nakahara Chuya sensed that the root power of divine forces was weakening, and his hair stood on end in shock. Wait! Don't forcibly escape with that power, you'll get hurt. I'm not your enemy, ah. In that instant, Nakahara Chuya, who had been searching for his origins for years, shouted in fear. The next moment, Yakimaru broke free, staggering backward, one leg slipping free from its bindings, and part of his worn-out clothing falling off. His leg is gone. Nakahara Chuya almost felt his soul leave his body, thinking that he had accidentally snapped off Yakimaru's leg. He instantly withdrew his gravitational force. The pressure on Yakimaru disappeared, but he didn't even bother to retrieve his fallen leg. His body swayed slightly, and using the strength of his arms, he fled without looking back. Nakahara Chuya's entire body trembled as he hurried to pick up the leg that had fallen to the ground. It was a complete leg, extending up to the thigh, with no warmth or flesh like that of a living person. Just like the boy's arms, it was an artificial limb. It went without saying, this boy, who wielded powers similar to Arahabaki, had no real limbs at all. A stitched-together human. A different kind of beings born from divine power. Nakahara Chuya, sweating profusely, didn't hesitate to pick up the leg and chase after the other, unleashing his fastest speed. Stop for me. But after the first chase, there was a second, and then a third. Internally, Nakahara Chuya was falling apart. Half an hour later, when Dazai Osamu found Yakimaru, he was sitting by the roadside, missing a leg. There were no traces of fresh blood beneath the hem of his clothing, and he looked more like a damaged puppet than a living person. The black-haired boy, with his hair tied in a ponytail, turned his face toward Dazai Osamu as he approached. The hollow, lifeless eyes held neither pain nor despair. Only calm and solitude. Dazai Osamu didn't know what to say. To live like this, by his own logic, death would be a kind of release. Why cling to life? Without hands, without legs, unable to touch this world. No eyes, no tongue, no ears, unable to know what this world looks like. It's not stupidity, but what's the point of clinging to life? This world has never treated you kindly. Can you stand up? Countless harsh words could have come from Dazai Osamu, but when he spoke, they turned into this instead. He helped Yakimaru up with a light touch, and Yakimaru quickly understood his intention. Balancing on one leg, he stood up, slightly taller than Dazai Osamu, his back straight despite the situation. Dazai Osamu wouldn't let him use his bladed arms and found a branch to act as a crutch to help him maintain his balance. Yakimaru felt apologetic towards Dororo for letting them see him without his left leg. I'm really sorry. He couldn't maintain a decent appearance. Dazai Osamu, without hesitation, said, still managing to stand, huh? Not bad. Next time you run off, let's hope you don't lose your head. After scolding Yakimaru, Dazai Osamu took half a step ahead of him, grabbing hold of him to bring him back. That night, Dazai Osamu tied Yakimaru up in a safe area. To ensure the blades wouldn't unsheath, he used a method that referenced something unspeakable, tying his shoulders and arms together. This left Yakimaru almost hanging in mid-air, his usually expressionless face showing a rare hint of innocence and pity. Dazai Osamu showed no sympathy at all, coldly pointing at Yakimaru's nose as he warned him. Stay here. This Dororo is really fierce. Yakimaru couldn't move, and with his gaze fixed, he could only watch the life flames drift away from him. Late at night, Suribachi Street greeted the sound of Dazai Osamu descending the stairs. In his hand was the banned book he had bought earlier, Complete Suicide, which he read as he walked. The boy's figure blended with the shadows of the eaves, appearing even darker and more eerie than the people who actually lived there. After inquiring and learning what had happened during the day, Dazai Osamu calmly, yet chillingly, said, the Sheep King, the leader of a flock of little lambs, right? First, he used his gravity ability to defeat Yakimaru, destroying one of his legs. Then he went on to chase after Yakimaru, forcing him to flee in desperation. While this 100% matched the facts, there was something about the description that didn't sit quite right. If Nakahara Chuya were to hear it, he would surely stomp his foot in anger and retort, I didn't intend to destroy his leg. He was the one who insisted on running away. No matter how much he tried to explain, Nakahara Chuya's reputation as the villain in this story was already set. Dazai Osamu had deeply remembered him. How to dismantle the sheep from within. It seems the best way is to make them collapse internally, stabbing them hard from the inside. Back at the sheep's base, Nakahara Chuya was still fuming, interrogating Shirase. Explain yourself clearly. Who exactly did you kill? I didn't. Shirase, his entire body aching and his face bruised, looked utterly disbelieving. Nakahara Chuya would rather trust the enemy than believe his words. Nakahara Chuya felt deeply disappointed. I gave you a chance, and you're still hiding things from me. Do you really think that person would come out of nowhere just to attack you? Why don't you go and ask the other residents of Suribachi Street if he ever attacks the wrong person? Shirase protested loudly, I was the one being attacked. And instead of caring, you're blaming me. Isn't it you who's killed the most people in our sheep organization? Nakahara Chuya shot a vicious glare at him, his cold, domineering eyes making Shirase shrink back a bit. Chuya only frightened him when he was in a storm of rage. I kill to protect myself and for retaliation. This was the line that the boy who had grown up in this place had never crossed. If I find out that you killed an innocent person, I'm sorry. I won't protect you anymore, Shirase. You better pray that the person you killed deserved it, because I can't accept that one of my comrades is a liar, a killer, someone who has no respect for the lives of others. These words carried a heavy weight. The other members of the sheep shifted uneasily, no longer treating Shirase's situation as mere entertainment. They quickly stepped in, offering some kind words to mediate the situation. Nakahara Chuya was mentally exhausted and had no interest in hearing the others' attempts to mediate. He shot a glance at Shirase, who still refused to admit anything, and then returned to his own room. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he pressed his hands against his forehead, covering the light from the ceiling with his palms. He rarely used his hands like this, afraid of losing control of his power. His hands had become the trigger for fully utilizing Arahabaki's power. Suppressing his frustration, Nakahara Chuya glanced over at the leg sitting on his desk, his eye twitching slightly. What kind of mess is all this? He didn't know. More serious matters awaited him ahead. Nakahara Chuya had inadvertently offended someone who was known for holding grudges. That person, with a small-minded nature, approached the sheep base, expressionless in the darkness, muttering to himself. The sheep takes in orphans and young people, how nice. I fit those requirements. He touched the bandages on his face, then let out a blood-curdling scream as he ran toward the sheep's headquarters. Help! The port mafia is after me. Before Yakimaru could starve to death, he will spend 3 days dismantling this boring organization. For some reason, when Nakahara Chuya heard the mournful cry from outside, he shivered, as if he were hearing the background sound of a ghost story in the middle of the night. Who's out there, running to us for help in the middle of the night? He impatiently stepped outside, grumbling under his breath, but deep down, he still considered protecting those weaker than him as his responsibility. Those with power naturally have to bear a little more. Chapter 5 End.